All right. I would like to welcome everyone. I'm so glad you could make it to today's webinar, Electrifying Society, an important AP environmental science concept and a link to carbon neutrality. My name's Kate Kingsbury. I am BFW's Professional Development and Special Events Manager. And I'd like to start by introducing today's presenter, author Andrew Friedland. Andrew is the Richard and Jane Pearl Professor in Environmental Studies and Chair of the Environmental Studies program at Dartmouth. He has his BA in Biology and Environmental Studies and a PhD in Earth and Environmental Science from the University of Pennsylvania. He's the founding chair of the Advanced Placement Test Development Committee for Environmental Science. He's participated in a number of trainer and teacher workshops and has guest lectured at the St. Johnsbury Academy AP Institute for Secondary Teachers. He served on panels for the NSF, the USDA, and the Science Advisory Board of the EPA. He has authored or co-authored more than 75 peer-reviewed publications and a book, Writing Successful Science Proposals. And he's been researching the effects of air pollution, carbon, and soils for over 2 decades and has begun research on the impact of individual choices and personal action on energy consumption and the environment. I'd like to introduce him. He is passionate about saving energy and can be seen wandering the halls of the Environmental Studies program at Dartmouth with a kilowatt meter determining the electricity load of vending machines, data projectors, and computers. I'd like to welcome him and have him present to you our webinar, Electrifying Society, an important APES concept and a link to carbon neutrality. Andy, welcome.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks for that introduction. And I want to thank you for the various help that you will do and have done, and thanks also to Matt Weaver for the technical support. I just put my slides on, and do you mind, could somebody raise their hand just so I know that you can hear me and that somebody can see the slides? There we go. Great. We see some hands, and also I get an idea about how much, if any, delay there is, so that's great. So I hope this will be an electrifying talk, and I'll try to cut it right there with all the puns about electrifying. But I did want to talk about this subject. It's sort of a new way of approaching things for me, and I think you'll see in a few minutes that it really doesn't matter what I talk about or what you talk about with your students. We're looking at just different ways to emphasize important APES concepts and link them to important topics in the course and motivate students to learn the material, and in particular to learn how to do simple arithmetic calculations, which in a few minutes I'll explain are really important in AP environmental science. So Kate gave you a little bit of background, and so basically I'm just going to elaborate on 1 or 2 things, and this little list of 3 things, the size of the font is in proportion to how much time we're going to spend on each of these different things. So I'll do a little bit of intro, then I'll talk about this electrifying society. At the end, I'll explain how our book, Environmental Science for AP, can really help you with getting these concepts across. So I did my undergraduate work and graduate work at UPenn in the environmental studies and environmental science field, and I have been at Dartmouth for 30 years. I was chair for 11 years. I'm no longer chair, and I think I've taught Intro to Environmental Science 28 or 29 times. So I'm pretty much teaching the same course that most of you are teaching or are about to start teaching. My work is on carbon storage, and lately I've been working the most on what happens when we cut down forests to use that wood for fuel in replacing coal or oil or natural gas. What does that do to carbon stored in the soils, and how does that change the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere? At the bottom of the slide you can see the 3 courses that I typically teach in a given year: Intro to Environmental Science, Energy and the Environment, and then a course in Forest Ecosystem, Biogeochemistry. My involvement with AP Environmental Science, as Kate said, I chaired the original committee that created AP Environmental Science, and I stayed on as chair through the first 2 or 3 exam offerings, and then I stepped down. About 10 years later, the College Board asked me to come back for a reassessment. It was the Curriculum Development and Assessment Committee. We reevaluated AP Environmental Science, and not very many changes came out of that. I think our assessment was that the course is pretty good as it is. I just want to say right out that I have no official or unofficial involvement with AP registered trademark, the course, so everything I say is just my opinion, having participated and chairing the founding of the course and observing the exams for some 20 years. I am making statements, but in no way is anything I'm saying endorsed by the College Board. I have no inside knowledge about anything the College Board is doing. I'm just an observer, perhaps a passionate observer, but I'm just an observer. And I am passionate about the subject and the course, Intro to Environmental Science, whether it's taught at the high school level or it's taught at the college level. And I'm very proud that I helped participate in something that went from 5,000 exams taken the first or second year up to something like 160,000 exams were taken this past June. And so we don't know if that means slightly fewer than that many students took the course and some just show up and take the exam, or maybe it's more than that, but that's a good number for the United States and other locations around the world, and I'm enthusiastic about that, and I hope you are too. If you're one of the instructors teaching AP Environmental Science, I think you should be proud and you should share in that as well. So the former chief reader of AP Environmental Science made a statement that really had an impact on me. He said that fluency with numerical manipulation or reading graphs or taking some data points and doing a few mathematical manipulations and coming up with a story about those data, he said that that was essential to success on the AP exam. In fact, he said that someone who knew everything about a subject but perhaps was just not so good with the math, he said that that person could at best get a 4 on the exam. And that in order to get a 5, you had to have this fluency with graph reading, data construction, manipulation. We're not talking about calculus here. We're talking about dimensional analysis, adding, subtracting, dividing, numerical manipulation, arithmetic. And that really struck me, and I agree with that philosophy. I think that philosophy was right there when we designed the course at the beginning, and I think it carries to this day. So I want to give you some pointers today about how you can do that, specifically with this concept of electrifying our economy, electrifying our infrastructure, and reducing our carbon emissions. But I want to argue that you have the skills to do that by finding things that your students care about. Take stories from the local or national headlines. Use data from their daily lives. Find excuses to analyze things and make a few calculations. That can be the fuel bill from your school, if you can get the vice principal or whoever pays the bills to tell you how much natural gas or oil or electricity you use. If you've got students that are into cars, can you do it with their cars, their parents' cars, with the new Tesla, with the Nissan Leaf? What can you do? So I want to say that you can come up with a lot of these stories, but I'm going to use the example today of electrifying the economy. So I hope that sounds like a good way to start, and I'm going to say that this graph, which I imagine everyone is familiar with and all of our students should be familiar with, is really the ultimate outcome. We want to, if we're going to maintain human existence at a comfortable level, we need to stabilize and eventually reduce atmospheric carbon dioxide concentrations. So this graph shows parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere on the y-axis, and it shows year from when this measurement was first taken in the Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii in 1959 to the present. And there's a small URL at the bottom where you can go and download this data every month. I downloaded this one in June of this year, but I could have today downloaded the October version of this graph, which doesn't change very much. It just had a tiny little bit of, maybe something else up here, but it was basically the same, maybe just a little bit up there, but basically the same graph. So that is our ultimate metric. Now, someone else might talk about something and say, I want to measure the number of species on the planet, or I want to measure the number of people. But what I'm working on today is how do we change that? How do we slow that increase in CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere? So, is that okay so far? There are 4 people with their hands raised. If you don't mind unraising your hand, clicking that again, and take that off, and maybe throw up a few hands so I know that there's something that is, you know, if that's okay, that's my premise, and I want to go into the main part of this webinar, and that would be, so I don't see anything, and Kate said she would interject if a question came in that seemed really timely and we needed to get it out there for everybody. So, okay,